Steve Haney, who was the representing lawyer for Christian Dawkins, is one of the best lawyers in the state of Michigan. He's represented athletes like Magic Johnson, Dominique Wilkins as a sports agent, and as we said, was representing Christian Dawkins through the two cases versus the federal government, and was a part of the scheme. He was on the HBO documentary. He joins us now from Michigan this morning here on OTB. Good morning, Steve. Thank you for your time.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. My pleasure.
First, how did you guys, or not you guys, how was HBO, can you answer this question, able to play the audio? Because that was the big rub back when the case was going down, that Wade and LSU were trying to get the audio thrown out of court. That evidence was sealed and not allowed in open court, but then HBO got their hands on it, and that was the first time that the public had heard the audio. How did that happen?
That's a good question, and it wasn't the first time we had an issue like that. Throughout the duration of the 3 years that we litigated the case, it was a constant challenge, fighting the leaks that were coming out. And, the majority of the leaks that were coming out were not favorable to the defendants. So, you had this dynamic where defense teams pointing the finger at the government's pointing the finger at the defense team. And, it wasn't the first time. So I don't know. And, Yahoo clearly had somebody feeding them with some very, very damaging discovery that was sealed under a protective order and was disseminating it, for 3 years. And I can remember very, very vividly there were expense reports that were leaked that were ASM business records showing Christian Dawkins' expense reports, who he was paying, how much he was paying, when he was paying. And they obviously had somebody inside that was providing that information. But when you have the volume of discovery in a case like this that you have, with as many hands and eyes that are on it, that were on it, it's hard sometimes to contain that type of evidence from getting out.
Steve Haney joining us here, Christian Dawkins' lawyer from the scheme earlier this week. What's your legal explanation, Steve, from a case that seemed like the federal government had accomplished what they wanted to seek out to do? They wanted coaches. They had coaches. They get to the open court, and they don't try the coaches. You guys are the ones that are ended up in trouble. To me, as Christian said, I agree with him 100%. I can't believe that the federal government sought out to get Christian Dawkins. At what point did you feel this narrative switch?
Well, I had the advantage of being a former prosecutor. So, for me, their tactic was clear. And, having tried federal cases and been involved in a lot of federal cases, they wanted to get a lower-level guy like a Dawkins, like a Book Richardson, and wanted to flip them and have those guys testify against their superiors or others that they could provide information on that were higher up the food chain. When that didn't happen, we had a really good group of defense lawyers. You had Jeff Lichtman, that was representing Tony Bland. It was El Chapo's lawyer, and he had successfully defended John Gotti Jr. in some cases.
Damn.
You guys got a guy down in New Orleans, Craig Mordock, incredible lawyer, a lot of experience. He did a really good job with Book. We just all dug in. And, some guys pled, but they pled with no cooperation. And, when Christian would not roll over, they were very, very upset. They were of the impression that he would, and then he changed his mind. Initially, when they arrested him, he had indicated he would cooperate and provide them with information, and then he didn't do that. So I think what ended up happening is, for those who saw this scheme, spoiler alert if you haven't, when this guy D'Angelo went off the reservation and did whatever he did, that got him taken off the case, which we never found out what it was, and we wanted to know. We actually filed motions to find out what level of misconduct he had engaged in. When he was off the case, that story had a shelf life, right? Okay, he's over in Italy taking care of his sick mom. Well, he can't do that for 6 months or a year. So at that point, I think they had to pull the trigger, and they didn't really have probably the case that they really wanted after putting all that money and time into it, and they were stuck with basically, hedging their bet that Dawkins would flip, and he didn't.
We're talking to Steve Haney from the scheme, Christian Dawkins' lawyer here on Off the Bench. And Steve, I'm a layman, and I feel like in pop culture, you always hear about entrapment. I don't even know if that's an actual thing. But I will say this, when they're playing the tapes and Christian Dawkins is actively saying, I think paying coaches is really dumb, and they're hammering it home like, No, like I'm the money guy, and that's what I want to do. I want to pay the coaches. Is that entrapment? What is entrapment? Like that? That's what that felt like to the layman.
It beyond bizarre. You know, we filed 3 motions to get an entrapment instruction in front of the jury. You know, you have all these people, these legal experts that don't really know what happened in the courtroom. You know, you have these guys in their mom's basement in Arizona, you know, eating a bowl of Fruit Loops, you know, taking shots at Murdoch, taking shots at, you know, the lawyers. Look, we did everything we could to get an entrapment instruction to the jury for that very reason. I mean, you could hear the tapes. Dawkins is telling the guy, I'm not going to give the money to coaches. Christian makes the best point of all. Why would not, you know, I'm a former NBA player agent, so I can really relate to this. Why would a coach ever give an agent a player?
Yeah.
They don't want the kids to leave. They want to keep the kids in school. And no agent wants a kid that's going to be a 4-year kid, because he's not going to be a first-round draft pick anymore. Those very rarely do you see a 4-year kid get drafted in the first round with the European kids and the one and done.
Yep.
So Dawkins was getting players, and he wasn't apologizing for it. He paid the family, and he said, "I think the family should have got paid. I'm not hurting any family by giving a family some money to give them some financial bridge to the point when they get to go to the NBA." So this whole notion, and you're absolutely right. To me, it was the most obvious case of entrapment I've ever seen. But we didn't even get that instruction to the jury, which the jury could have been instructed, look, okay, you find the guy did what he did, but if you believe the government induced him, i.e. a 21-year-old kid from Saginaw, Michigan with $100,000 cash on a yacht, then you can find him not guilty because he was induced into performing the acts that he performed and engaging in that conduct. So you're absolutely right. But we made a real strong and passionate run, and that's part of the appeal, too. That was one of our fundamental arguments in with the appeal, is that we didn't get an entrapment instruction to the jury.
And so, Steve, I'm trying to find out, because like if it's so obvious to all the parties involved that the coaches, that going after the coaches is not how this whole system actually works, then the only angle that I can come up with as to why they bang that drum so hard is because, yeah, Christian could give money to players' families, and that's against NCAA rules, but NCAA law are not laws, right? So did they have to go the coach's route, so then suddenly it becomes bribing a state official or whatever it was? Like, is that how they got actual legality involved?
Had to create a criminal act, right? So, like you said, look, he was breaking NCAA rules. There's no question about that. I know he was breaking NCAA rules long before he got caught breaking NCAA rules, and I was trying to persuade him not to do that. But you're absolutely right. They had to create a narrative that by giving the money to the coaches, then that was bribing a public official. And that's why if you listen to look, those wiretap phone calls didn't fall out of the sky, right? We had to listen to thousands of hours of wiretaps to mine out those calls where, I can remember vividly at 2 a.m., I'm listening to these wiretaps, and I'm hearing this guy, this FBI agent, this guy D'Angelo, just pushing these coaches, and Christian's like, dude, we should just take the money and go to the strip club if you want to just throw money away.
Right.
Because we'll get just as much out of that as we will if we pay coaches, because coaches don't have that influence over the kids. And, again, I think really my take-home from it was these guys didn't know anything about basketball, right? The Southern District didn't know anything at all about basketball. Marty Blazer was a football guy.
Yeah.
Right, I knew Marty back when I did football. I did football 20 years ago, and knew Marty Blazer back then.
How was that guy out of jail, Steve?
He's like a greaseball, Steve.
Good Lord.
And he's been bouncing around forever. I was when I was in law school, I was a runner for Marvin Demoff. Right, Marvin Demoff, maybe one of the greatest agents ever. Had Dan Marino and John Alloway in the same draft.
Wow.
I worked for Ralph Sindrich. In 2005, I ran the basketball division of the Sindrich and Company. And Ralph Sindrich had a huge football agency, and Ralph played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, I had familiarity, and we worked with Marty Blazer. So everyone kind of knew what Marty's stick was. But, yeah, it's amazing how a guy like that, who could be looking at 67 years, could go into a federal courtroom and give up a 21-year-old, kid and avoid any kind of criminal prosecution at all.
What did he even accomplish? Like, what did he even accomplish? Like, what was the trade-off? What did the government get for Marty Blazer? Nothing. Nothing happened.
Nothing really did happen, guys. And really, one thing, the documentary I thought was very good. I thought Pat did a really good job,
Mm-hmm.
Condellis. But we won 7 out of 10 counts.
Yes.
At trial, and that was something that the media said Dawkins code convicted, and they got convicted on a couple bribery counts. But to lose 7 out of 10 at trial, that's not a success, especially when you've spent God knows how much money, probably millions, with a 3-year investigation. That as a former prosecutor, I would have walked out of there pretty upset. And I don't think I think it fell flat.
And
bottom line.
And the public popularity you've gained since Tuesday night, I imagine, has been the backing from the public has probably been overwhelming, because just the feds just look lost. Like you said, I mean, they didn't understand the game of basketball first and foremost. You said you listened to the tapes. You got a great relationship with Christian Dawkins. We heard tapes on Will Wade and Sean Miller. How many coaches are on those tapes?
I mean, there are a number of other head coaches that could have been implicated, and I've been careful, and I'm still going to be careful about talking about anything that's subject to the protective order. But look, they Southern District and FBI, they knew a lot of other guys were engaged in the same conduct that these other coaches got charged with. So, I always really struggled with, the selectivity of, I don't think any of it should be illegal. Look, I've been advocating for players to get paid for 30 years. I played Division I basketball myself, and I, think we should have got paid back when I played. But so I'm not really looking at what Wade or Miller, if they did it. I'm not thinking they should lose jobs or go to jail or anything. But at the same time, if they did it and others, did it as well, it just didn't seem to be a real even application of the law in this case at all, which is a little troubling.
Steve, one of the core debates of the movie, when Christian Dawkins worked for Andy Miller, was he an agent or was he a runner?
He was a runner. He's a runner, man. That kid is no agent. When Christian came to me and told me about this management company he's starting, I said, Christian, you're not an agent. I said, look, I'll pay for your school. You want to go back to college? I'll pay for your books and tuition. I said, you're going to be running around with the wrong crowd. And he actually wanted me to go down to Miami with him to meet his investors a month before the raid. And I said, well, tell me a little bit about what's going on. He said, well, I got these investors, and I'm starting the sports agency. I said, well, who's going to be the agent? You're not. He said, well, I want you to be the agent. I said, well, I'm not going to be the agent. I don't know who these people are. And it was the FBI agent. So I dodged the bullet there. I almost became part of the case. But he was not an agent. I love Christian. And
I do too.
A great kid, but he's 21 years old, no college education. And, ASM didn't look at him as an agent either. He was the guy that could do the things that none of those guys at ASM could do. None of them. Mm-hmm. They couldn't go recruit the black kids. They couldn't. Andy Miller wasn't going to, neither was the rest of the staff of agents they had there. Yeah. They needed Christian because he had a great personality, and he could go and make people feel comfortable, and he could bring in all the business. And then if something went south, right, they could have him holding the bag, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because Christian almost does give off, Prodigy is probably a bit of hyperbole, but I mean, I don't know, starting that website when he was 11 years old, having coaches paying for that, and he talks about the
letter he wrote his mom and dad.
The letter he wrote his mom and dad, then getting the deal with Atlantic Records. What's your opinion of Christian in that regard and how he's going to come out of all of this?
No, I think he'll be fine. He has an incredibly bright future. He's in an industry now that, felony conviction is like a badge of honor, in the record industry. Yeah, right. So nobody's going to frown upon that.
Yeah, right.
That gives him street credibility. But, and he held his head high, and he fought it, and he had some success. He had some, some consequences for what happened, and he'll face it like a man. But I think now he's definitely on the right path, and he's an incredibly intelligent kid. I mean, he's one of the most brilliant kids I've ever been around. And I'm like a big brother, so I tell him what he needs to hear, not what he wants to hear. But I think he's going to be okay. He'll end up okay.
Steve Haney, who was the leading scorer for San Jose State in 1989 at 17 points per game, and one of the best lawyers in the state of Michigan, joining us here this morning was Christian Dawkins, lawyer. If you hadn't seen The Scheme yet, it's must-watch television, especially in this part of the country. Thank you, Steve. This was great.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right,
Thanks a lot.